We are Flint River Presbytery.
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 A multi-part video series by Presbyterians for Presbyterians. The vision of our executive presbyter, We Are Flint River Presbytery, introduces church members and church officers to the shared mission, organization, and resources of our presbytery right here in Southwest Georgia.
Committee on Mission and Evangelism, and we do a great job at mission. The Flint, Walter Flint Fund, a wonderful thing, and a man with great vision and with some money that he could make that vision a reality, and he wanted to help small churches, which we got a lot of in Flint River Presbytery. Does wonderful things for lots of different people. Trying to do that and trying to save my own church, because we became eligible to use the Walter Flint Fund, and it's been lifesaver for us for the last few years. So, but I want to get off. I don't want to go extinct. I want to use the funds to create ways for us to help ourselves to grow, and I think that's what Walter Flint had in mind when he created that process. He didn't want to feed people, just continue to feed them. He wants them to become independent and grow and get better in the process. And so we have an opportunity to try to do that, to help congregations throughout the presbytery to do that.
Walter Flint was the pastor at Elmendale Church for over 50 years. He began preaching there in the 1960s and was the pastor there almost my entire life until most recently. Mr. Walter was a Yankee. He was from New York. He and his family were from New York, and they came down after World War II. Mr. Walter was a veteran, and he worked in some type of secret operations in World War II that he was very proud of, that had to do with radio communication. He was very proud of that. He and his family were Presbyterians, but he was not an ordained minister until much, 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 much later. And he came to that ministry in a circuitous way. He was a member of Mensa. He was a genius. He loved science and light and sound waves and music. He played the cello. He smoked a pipe. He was an unusual, some might even say an eccentric man. And we adored him. We adored Mr. Walter, his sister Janie, who also came down with him every Sunday and played the violin. She was a first chair concert violinist. And so Elmendale, this tiny little church, had this incredible minister and his sister who played incredible music, and another sister, Ruthie, who played the piano. And so sometimes she would come. She was married and had a family, but they all lived in Albany together. And they would come down on Sundays and be a part of our church family. And we loved them very, very much.
We have been very blessed in our presbytery to have some very generous people. One man in particular set up a fund specifically for the smaller congregations, because so many of our churches are now. And it is there to provide assistance with almost anything they need, except for looking after the building itself. And so that is one that really comes to mind, because we as a committee, in addition to managing the money, also when we have money come in, this man said what he wanted the funds to be used for, but we've had other people donate money that they want us to decide what it needs to be used for. We have had some property that has been sold that then we have to decide how that money gets allocated, and whether it's to a fund to look after buildings, to manage people with creative visions for new ways of worshiping, whether it's for mission support. There are just so many things. And a lot of that, at least the initial conversations, start with finance.
Mr. Walter made the majority of his money in the stock market, and he knew how to manipulate stocks and move stocks, and he told us those sorts of things all the time, which I don't know if any of our congregants really valued that much, but it bode him well. And he saved. He was a spendthrift. He might even be called a Scrooge, although he would not like that. But he was a brilliant man, and his mark is indelible. Even on our congregation now, we will have a sermon and say, do you remember what Mr. Walter said about doubting Thomas? We just talked about that last week.
Yeah, and St. Andrew's Mission has been supported. We have about 10 children in our church right now, and that number vacillates a little bit, but we feel the need to have robust children's ministry. And so part of what we used our grant this year for is to pay for our children's minister, Beth Holloway, who's a retired Methodist minister, a real expert in children's ministry. We're actually getting a deal, like a real steal, having her in the church. And it's really been a blessing to our church congregation and church life as a whole.
Before Mr. Walter passed away, he made it very clear that he was going to leave to the presbytery a significant amount of money so that churches would not have to suffer in trying to find ministers. That was his goal at the beginning. And it wasn't for, in his mind, from the pulpit, it wasn't for all of the churches. It was for the churches who struggle, whose congregations were dwindling, who had limited funding, who maybe didn't have the funds to find someone who had just come out of seminary. He didn't want our Presbyterian churches and our congregations to have to settle. He wanted us all to have the best of the best, which was ironic because Mr. Walter wore shirts that he'd had from 1972. So not the best of the best in everything, but the best of the best in preaching and teaching and God's word being presented to a group of people that needed to hear it, whoever that group may be. So the fund came from his incredible investments that he made throughout the years and the money he did not spend on new clothes or new shoes. And he left that to the presbytery and trusted that we would use it in the way he wanted us to use it, which can be frustrating. But it's there, and it's there for a good reason.
Right now, we are served by a commissioned ruling elder, and he's wonderful. Wade Spooner, we love him dearly. A few years back, we had some major repairs that had to be done on the church, and we would not have been able to pay his salary had we not received a grant from Flint River Presbytery to do that, to pay his salary. Wade is such a wonderful guy, and he's a peanut farmer, and he loves preaching. He loves our church. He loves being a pastor, and not just a preacher, but a true pastor. And he's wonderful at that. He would have worked for free if he had to. But so it was very nice to be able to receive the grant from Flint River Presbytery that paid for that.
One of the stories that impacted all of us that Mr. Walter shared with us from the pulpit during one of his sermons was that when the Great Depression hit in New York, he and his sisters watched as their family home and all their belongings were sold because they couldn't afford them anymore. They couldn't make the payments on them. And I think that loss greatly impacted Mr. Walter in the way that he saved and the way that he wanted to provide for the churches after. There were a number of times that Mr. Walter donated to churches in our presbytery without us knowing, or a number of times that he might have donated to a family in particular without telling. But the Walter Flint Fund, he was very proud of, mostly because of the largesse I think that he had accumulated, and that none of his things were ever sold at public auction. That had an incredible impact on his life and on all of our lives as a consequence of that. The measure of a man is in how they are remembered. And we remember many of his sermons, the things he pointed out. He liked to weave science and space and dinosaurs, as he pronounced them, into our sermons, and say, one of the things that lasts with me when my children ask me questions is something Mr. Walter said to me when I was a little girl asking questions, and that was, never doubt our God. Mysterious, wonderful, amazing things can happen that you can't even dream of. So who is to say that dinosaurs didn't exist? Who is to say that they did? Why would you ever think that they wouldn't? We were always encouraged to question, to ask questions, to dig deeper. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've remained a Presbyterian all my life. I like a denomination that asks you to think on your own.